Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Kids and COVID-19 webinar. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you again for joining our first Kids and COVID-19 webinar. This first webinar is in partnership with the U.S. Soccer Foundation. So shout out to all the Soccer for Success coaches that are online with us today. And thank you for listening and spending your time with us and prioritizing mental health. So just a quick piece on the reason for this webinar today. As coaches and as athletes, we're built for resilience. We know how to persevere. We're gritty, but we still need skills for our tool belt. And many sport-based youth development organizations and coaches have reached out to Doc Wayne for assistance around mental health for themselves, their teams, and their individual athletes. So this hour is specially designed for you. And if you're not familiar with Doc Wayne, you can look us up at docwayne.org. You can also reach out to us at support@docwayne.org if you need assistance. But a bit about our services and our organization is that our mission is to fuse sport and therapy to heal and strengthen at-risk youth. And usually, not during a pandemic, we are providing sport-based group therapy, individual therapy, and therapeutic mentoring, which is through Massachusetts CBHI services. And we really lean on sport to reduce stigma and increase access for kids 5 to 18. But during this COVID-19 pandemic, we have expanded services to all people through telehealth. So we're trying to do our best to do our part, and we realize this is a team effort. And we also want to acknowledge that any conversation around mental health can be triggering for some, and also that brain breaks are needed sometimes. So if you're on your second, third, or fourth Zoom call today, and you need to do some jumping jacks, or you need to be standing while you're listening to us on our Zoom call today, that's totally fine. And we want you to do what's best for you in your learning environment. So a bit about myself, and then I'll pass it on to my colleague, Coach Amanda. But my time at Doc Wayne has been about a decade, and I have dual training in sports psychology and mental health counseling. And while I'm a clinician by training, I'm a coach at heart, and I've coached from the youth sector all the way through college soccer. And I've also been through U.S. Soccer's National Training Certification Program. And I know that the language around that has changed a little bit, but I know many of the Soccer for Success coaches are familiar with that training certification. So I pass it on to my colleague, Coach Amanda, to introduce herself and give a few logistics about our webinar today. It's all yours, Amanda.
Thanks, Coach Becky. Like I said, I'm Coach Amanda at Doc Wayne. All of our clinicians are called coaches. I think that is a really important piece and aspect to the service that we do provide. A little bit about myself is I've been at Doc Wayne for the past 5 years. I've been a soccer player for far longer than that. I grew up playing soccer since I was 6 years old, played in college, had the opportunity to coach my sister's teams, a bunch of clinics. So I really do love the coaching aspect and the important part of, utilizing coaches in a way that support youth. So this is a very big, near and dear just piece for me. A little bit about our webinar. For logistics, it's going to be about an hour. If you want to ask a question, try to direct yourself to the Q&A portion. We will try to answer as many of them as we can. Currently, it's just me and Becky, so we'll be taking a break in the middle to answer some of those questions. We are recording this webinar, so you will be able to retrieve it at a later date. I know we did get a question earlier about that. If you're listening via the Facebook Live feature or you're listening to the recording, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask that question. We can put down our website and different ways for you to reach out to us, but support@docwayne.org. Any questions that you have, reaching out to us on social media channels. We try to interact as much as possible. So any questions, thoughts, comments, feelings that you have that come up during this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask any of those questions, because we're here to help.
And to give you a brief overview of our time together today, you can see that on your screen, but we want to make sure that you know that this time was designed for you. So as Amanda was saying, please reach out either after the webinar or during. We will also have a break in the middle for questions. And I also want to point out, just as a best practice for working with kids around mental health, that setting the agenda and letting them know what's going to happen provides them safety and also addresses some of the symptoms that they have around their trauma. And we're all really going through low-level community trauma right now with this pandemic. So although we're providing this to you right now, in the webinar, it's really a way to set the agenda and say, this is what our session is going to be made up of, and it provides a sense of comfort and reassurance to kids. And we also wanted to get a sense from the group of where you are logging in from today. So if you wouldn't mind just putting your name and where from the US or really the world you are joining us from today. And again, wanted to give a special shout out to our partner on this webinar, the US Soccer Foundation, as well as our Soccer for Success coaches who are on the call. So please just take a moment and let us know your name and where you're logging in from today.
Becky, it looks like on the question, the Q&A, that someone's having a hard time hearing you.
Hearing me?
Yeah. Oh, but we do have some people responding in the chat. We've got some people from Buffalo, Boston area, Syracuse, Germany, more Boston, Arkansas, Miami, Philadelphia. Wow. From Singapore and England. Wow, guys, really from all over.
Well, welcome everyone. I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't an issue across the board. It sounds like people are hearing us, but please do put in the chat if this is a common issue. And I think the attendance from across the globe is just representative of how powerful sport is that sport is our common language. And in addressing mental health concerns, we'll talk about this a bit later in the webinar, but in speaking to kids about the pandemic and about mental health, it's very useful to use sport-based language because it is the way that kids talk, and it's the way that we all talk in this, this sport-based youth development world. So as we transition, we wanted to acknowledge the importance of coaches and also help you all realize, if you haven't already, your true role in all of this around mental health. We're all being, as I mentioned, we're all being exposed to chronic stress and low levels of community trauma through this pandemic. And one of the proven protective factors for kids against negative outcomes, including early death, is a consistent, caring adult. Coaches can play this role and tremendously impact life outcomes. Specifically, there's reports of the reports of child abuse are down across the country. And we know that, in fact, the child abuse rates are not down, but just the reporting is down because the helpers, the coaches, the social workers, school counselors, teachers, all of these people who are keeping their eyes and their ears on kids are not able to do so right now. And we know that coaches can play this important role because they're trusted and they're able to be let into kids' homes virtually right now. And screening for suicide happens person to person as well. So kids are interacting with the people that are looking out for them, and they're not doing this in a private way. So we know there's people behind them, there's people watching over them when they're on these Zoom calls, so they may not feel comfortable being able to say, I need help right now. And we know that the numbers for calls to the National Suicide Prevention Line have increased substantially, and there's record numbers of text messages asking for help. So as coaches, we can create safe space, which we'll also talk about, but we're trusted members of these kids' lives, and we play this important role in protecting these kids. And on the field or off the field, good social relationships are a winning strategy for life. And they're tied to greater psychological and physical well-being. So what we want to do is we want to keep our kids safe, number one, and we want to turn the situation that we're in into a resiliency builder. So for kids in situations of moderate stress, if support is provided, then resiliency can be built rather than it turning into a negative situation. So as coaches, we can really turn this around for our kids. Amanda, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would say there is some studies out there. I think we all know that sport provides a bunch of different just skills. We're building teamwork, we're building resiliency, we're building connection, we're building problem solving. But those skills don't actually get built unless there are coaches there to teach those skills. So just playing soccer, just playing lacrosse, just playing football doesn't inherently build those skills without someone providing the structure and support to do that. And so the coaches really are such an integral part of sport, and that sport doesn't do everything that we want it to without coaches being there. So your role in this is so important, and it has been important. So feeling really confident in that you guys are already providing the skills that we are looking for and need, while also just kind of stepping up in this space and time and realizing that you're already healers and you're already educators. So every coach at Doc Wayne, everybody's a coach, every clinician's a coach, everybody is providing trauma-informed group therapy. But just because, you know, Doc Wayne coaches are doing that, I think that we can see a shift of coaches, you know, and they're still providing coaching. They're not providing group therapy, but just through a more trauma-informed lens, that we've seen that trauma-informed guides and different programs are helpful, not just for kids who have experienced some intense trauma, but kids who, you know, are just living their daily lives and may have experienced, you know, whether it's community violence or, you know, something similar to this, where I think that every child who is experiencing quarantine and not being able to go to school is having some kind of trauma impact. Each kid is going to react to this differently, but it's up to us as coaches to see, can we structure this for them? Can we help out? And just as Becky was saying, that like without the support of a coach, that we can't turn this into resiliency building and skill building. It's kind of just like sport, that we need a coach in order to support that.
And to share a quote from Muhammad Ali, you can see it on your screen: "The fight is won or lost, far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road long before I dance under those lights." So whenever I read this, I always think about the work on your mental health as a coach. So your own mental health, but also the mental health of your athletes and how vital that is. And it's just as important as physical training on the road to championships. And it's also more important in pursuit of your overall life outcomes. So just to keep this in mind, when there's a lot of frustration going on, when you're like, I can't get out there and do all the training that I wanted to do to advance my team or do what I needed to do to get that look from that college coach or on the sport-based youth development front, just get that time with my kids, is that if we can invest in mental health, that will produce these lifelong outcomes that we really want for our kids.
So right now we're working through this pandemic, and I think the really important thing to remember is that, you know, we're here talking about students and kids and our athletes, but this isn't just impacting them. It's impacting all of us. It's impacting the children that we work with, the parents that we work with. It's impacting all of you. So remembering this and reminding ourselves that there needs to be a little compassion for ourselves first before we're reaching out to other people, before we're having compassion for others. Something that coaches are already doing, again, are building up different spaces for kids to connect during this pandemic. The difficult thing that we need to kind of pay attention to is, where are the barriers, right? So we're trying to connect, we're doing as much as we can. There's Zoom calls, there's, you know, people are getting provided internet. What are the barriers that your students, athletes, kiddos are struggling with? How can we overcome that? Or at least, again, have some compassion for that. You may not really understand some of the different situations that your students are in, whether it's they have one computer for a bunch of different kids because they've had siblings, whether that student is, there's a high schooler in the house that needs the computer for a little bit more work than maybe a younger student who is looking to do a sport oriented thing for the day. Both are very important, but it just depends on where's the support coming from inside the home, and how do we access those barriers? Are we changing the times? Are we checking in with parents to make sure that they have the computer time, the computer availability for everybody? So I think that that's going to be really different for everybody across the board. Even just noticing neighborhoods. Some kids may be able to go outside and have a front yard, and some other kids aren't going to be because they live in an apartment complex, or they live in a heavily populated area and they're not comfortable going outside. So these are all really important things to notice. And if you are having a student who is having a hard time accessing your Zoom call, just figuring out, okay, what's my first step of compassion before I get into frustration? Because it is frustrating when we want to make sure that our students are accessing the information. One of the other things that can be very important during this time is giving some space for downloading and processing. How do we create that space and show that we are caring and giving space for these students that feel like they're not as connected to their peers, their coaches, their teachers, and providing them that space that it's not just, okay, we're going to jump on this Zoom call, we're going to get our heart rates up, and that's all, and then we're going to leave. I think that when we're in person, we do automatically, how are you guys doing? What's going on? We check in. If someone's sad, we go over, we check in with them. How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you upset? Are you angry? These are, again, things that we're naturally doing, but because we're changing the way that we do it, we want to make sure that we're still providing time, because the time is a little bit more structured on a Zoom call than it might be in a session or a practice. And just a reminder that, you know, it's okay to be silly with your kids. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to miss them. I miss all of my kids. And I'm sure that they love to hear stuff like that. So stuff like that is really important to make sure that we are addressing for the students, that they know that we have feelings too. And it doesn't matter what their feelings are, that those feelings are valid and our feelings are valid. So if we can model that for them, that's going to be really important.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Some practical things that you can do, and some of these I imagine everyone's doing, but just to name them and then to get into some things that people may not be doing, is one, reach out to your kids. And two is that we should be thinking about providing them not only online sports activities, but community connection and space to talk about what's on their mind. Provide them some opportunities to be with their friends, as Amanda's describing, and to show them, like, have you see their room or play a card game or do something like that. So there's a lot of online activities that are being offered right now, but there's so much going on in these kids' minds right now. They're just wondering, why are people wearing masks? And why can I not go to the playground? Or if they do understand those things and they can process those things, they may have worries about people in their lives and the state of the globe. And they just want to talk about that, and they want to download it with someone that they trust and they know that cares about them. And sometimes it's important to just be online with them and be available, and you don't necessarily have to have structured programming ready to go. So if you do have some structured programming, that's amazing and that's great. But just to be present and to be available and to be a support to your kids is also incredibly valuable right now. And so I know some of this is a little bit outside the comfort zone of some coaches, especially your new coaches if you're an administrator of a sport-based youth development agency. So you might want to coach them on how to be on Zoom with your kids and how to be on a phone call, especially if you're anticipating that there may be some anxiety on the other side of the phone or some unrest in the home. And so to coach your coaches to take a deep breath and to collect themselves and to center themselves. And some of that is to check in with themselves internally and to know when they're not able to be present for their kids. That's very helpful because they're not going to be able to regulate and to help someone else when they're not ready for that. So the younger coaches who are just entering the field, they perhaps have not been given these skills yet to be able to be an effective helper. And also, we're talking about how wonderful coaches are and how much they have to give, but also coaches should be acting within their comfort zone, and they should be leaning on professionals, so clinicians, psychiatrists, teachers, doctors, everyone else who's in their network, and they should be building a referral system when it's outside of your realm as a coach, and that's totally okay. You don't need to be doing everything for these kids, and it's also going to stretch you to a point that you're not available and ready for the things that you're good at. And also developing a list of resources for your coach if you're a sport-based youth development agency. And we have put one together for Docween that we're able to share during this webinar. And you're able to build upon it and narrow it down for your community. That's also really wonderful. But one other piece that I wanted to touch on too on this slide is just the possible discomfort for coaches in talking about mental health and bringing up mental health. And one helpful tip is to remember that everybody has mental health. So there's some stigma around the word of mental health, but everybody has it. Even if it's great or if it's not so great, literally everyone has mental health. And so you can start to integrate mental health into your training check-ins by saying, how's your training going? How's your juggling going? How are your touches on the ball going if you're a soccer coach? And then I also wanted to do a check-in with your mental game and your mental health. What's your status, 1 to 5? And then also start talking about sports stars who have been talking online about their mental health and just sending them clips. And there's many other ways that you can start to build upon this and grow that conversation, but that's an easy entryway.
I think one of my favorite examples of that has been the questions, and I can't remember exactly where it's from, but the question, how are you feeling right now? And then the response from the child is, happy, sad, lonely, and they respond with, and that's okay. I think that that's a really cool space and thought that, like, even if I'm feeling sad, lonely, any of our like negative feelings, that those feelings are also okay. And then on the flip side of that, if a child is feeling happy that they get to spend time with you, that they get to move around, that they shouldn't have to feel guilty about that either, that maybe other people are feeling sad and anxious, and in that moment, if they're feeling happy, that that's okay. So validating that piece, I think, is really huge. For this next slide, before Becky gets into it, again, I think that somebody had mentioned the chat feature is not available. So in the Q&A feature, if you want to put in some of the coping skills that you guys have and that you guys use, because we're going to go over just some different ways for coping, but I know that everybody already has either one or two of them. So if you want to drop them in the chat, and then when we're done discussing this, we'll go over it a little bit.
And thanks for sharing those coping skills. So what's the most important thing we can do for young people who have been exposed to trauma, and with the understanding and lens that COVID-19 and this pandemic are a trauma? The answer is to support their coach. So the coach is the person who's going to facilitate all of these things. They're going to facilitate these protective relationships that we talked about, provide safety. They're going to be able to teach them competency and these skills, whether they're mental health skills or they're sport-based skills. And that competency is going to build their confidence and also separate their identity away from the pandemic and the trauma. So not thinking about themselves as being completely wrapped up in COVID-19, but also say, yes, I'm still a valuable member of this society, and I have skills, and I'm still growing. So we want to pay attention to this coach, because this coach is doing all of these things for this athlete. So in order to be present on the phone or on Zoom, coaches need to take care of themselves, and youth sports organizations need to support them in this. So you can see, and I'm hearing back some things that potentially some people aren't seeing all of these slides, but if you're seeing the slide, there are some things that coaches can be supported around: using your supports, building your team, self-care, and coach's coping skill kit. And so just to list a few things as you're all putting in your coping skills, building your team is your peers and your Soccer for Success coaches that you work with, or other people in your coaching life that you can lean on, that you can call and you can download a session with, and you can talk to them and say, hey, this possible kid was a little bit challenging for me. Can I talk to you about it? And can I lean on you for support? And your supports are your natural supports. So your family, your partner, your friends, those people in your life that you can regulate yourself with. And self-care, one thing that athletes do that coaches normally do not for their mental health is to warm up and cool down. And that can be physically, if you're actually providing youth sessions, but also mentally. So if we're on Zoom, to have a little bit of space before your session to take 5-10 minutes and prepare yourself, but also not schedule a session running up to 30 seconds before you go into your next session with your athlete. But also taking some time afterwards, if you went through a tough session, to use your own coping skills kit and download that session, or reflect on what could have been better, what went great, and also take care of yourself mentally. If you're still on the field, or when we go back to the field, to take some time to actually stay active and to play. So the reason why people got in the game in the first place, or to become coaches, was to enjoy the game. And a lot of times coaches still coach, but they're not participating anymore. And self-talk is another big one right now. So in this space of isolation, there's not a lot of people to talk to in person, but to remind yourself what you're doing well and to reinforce the good in life. Amanda, what did we get in the chat feature or in Q&A?
We got one. I don't know if it's pausing. Oh, we got, let's see. So one of them was running or walking with the dog. I think that's a really big one. Getting outside when you can, as long as you're staying safe and feel safe. Obviously, I think the big ones that people do are things like meditation, yoga, and exercise. I think we all have the ability, and it helps to do some exercise, especially as coaches. You know, we want to practice what we preach. Obviously, if you have the opportunity to get into some therapy, there are tons of spaces in order that are providing telehealth as well. So having your own therapist is definitely really helpful. Different things such as like affirmations in the beginning of the day, gratitude journals, which are really helpful for people. It definitely switches the mindset, right? You're using a different part of your brain. You're not focusing on those like disparities, but we're focusing on the things that we have. We're not ignoring them, right? We're just trying to focus on different things in different spaces. Another really good one, if people are struggling with meditation or struggling with sitting and being quiet, that idea of progressive muscle relaxation. That's a really big one that I think athletes really take to, because it does involve the body, and it does involve the parts of us that get neglected sometimes by meditation. So that like clenching and relaxing, there's plenty of them on YouTube. If you want to look up progressive muscle relaxation. Let me see if I can find any of these other, what do we do? Getting outside to walk the dogs. That was a big one. All right, can't find my other ones, but team, I think that's a really good, just a couple options, and continuing to figure out what makes you feel good in this time. You're allowed to feel good, you're allowed to feel okay, and you're allowed to experience some joy. And let's not forget that just as we are coaches, the biggest thing that you could take away from this webinar would be to take care of yourself first. Because no matter what happens, what else you do, you're going to act out of intention and act out of a better, more comfortable, more joyful space than if we aren't taking care of ourselves and if we aren't regulated. That is one of the first tenets of trauma-informed care, is to make sure that you are calm, cool, and collected during times of stress, during times of chaos, and while chaos is sitting in front of you. So it's not the easiest thing in the world. Sounds pretty easy, but when you're approached and have these chaotic situations, these heavy situations sitting in front of you, that's a practice that's going to be really helpful. Maintaining your calm, taking a breath in the moment, that those things are all really huge. So anything that brings you pleasure is going to be really helpful here.
Yeah, and as you see on your screen here, all of these skills that we want for ourselves as coaches, they're the same as we want for our athletes. So all of these outcomes. And it's no coincidence. So when we're regulated as a coach or even an administrator of a sport-based youth development agency, we're able to co-regulate with either the athlete, or if you're the supervisor of the coach, you're able to co-regulate with that person. So you want to make sure to be achieving these outcomes so that you can help others. And we want to pause here for questions before we launch into some skills that you can utilize with your athletes. So we focus the first section of the webinar on self-care, and then we're going to talk about skills that you can apply to your athletes and your teams.
So Shalini has sent us a really great question. I will read it off, but Doc Wayne and their coaches, clinicians, do amazing work. Can you talk about how telehealth is different from your normal routine? What are some positives and some things that surprise you in a really good way? Working with some of our clinical game changers, there are ones that are on the ground doing this work in the biggest capacity right now. The things that I've heard from them are, sometimes you get more consistent responses because for some families it is easier to show up because of the just access. They have the access to Wi-Fi right now, and it's usually access to transportation or anything like that that makes it a little bit more difficult. Other things, there's a lot more sessions that kind of can go back to back. So paying attention to our clinicians and making sure that they are doing more self-care than they have been in the past. So we are really focusing on making sure that they're okay, and that they're doing that work that we're telling all of you to be doing, because our coaches do want to maintain that calm as well. And other positives, I think that one of the things that the Game Changers report really noticing is that there's a high level of verbal interaction. Doc Wayne is such a sport-based human service agency that we are very actively moving our bodies, using our bodies, that mind-body connection. There obviously are spaces where we are connecting verbally with these kids, but a lot of it is using our body. A lot of it is very physical. And so we can kind of have some blocks where we're not hearing verbally from these kids, and now they're being given a space to talk, and a space to talk with these other students who they have bonded with very physically. So the past year, they've been creating these relationships with each other, and now have been given this space to talk about that, to talk about themselves. And I do think that the mix between the two has been really helpful. So thank you so much for that question, Shalini. How might an organization not in your area partner with Doc Wayne to possibly avail itself or your organization's expertise in our sport-based youth development programming? Miss Becky, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I would invite you to email me. You should have my email address from the webinar link. If you do not, you can email support@docwayne.org, and I will receive your email and answer it. But in short, this webinar series, COVID Kids and COVID-19, is our first entry into providing some support and training. And we anticipate in the future to be able to provide some training to sport-based youth development agencies and mental health agencies to be able to further launch Doc Wayne into other communities and other regions. So I look forward to having a further conversation with you.
Lovely. And I think this last one that I have, which is how do you help students deal with the loss of spring season? Becky, how do you feel about doing that one at the end?
Yeah, that sounds good, because we're going to provide some strategies in this next section and then can circle back if we don't adequately answer that.
Beautiful. I do love this. There's one more just coping skill, being extra forgiving with myself. It's okay if I wasn't as productive today as I wanted to be. I tell our athletes this as well, because they feel a lot of pressure within school and team demands, making sure that they balance work and relaxation. Love that. I think that's so important. Mine says everything.
Perfect. So if you continue to have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat box, and we will answer them at the end. And we will hold that question that Amanda was mentioning.
All right, so we have some examples on how to talk to kids during COVID-19. We have, again, as Becky said, some actual verbiage in the PDF that's going to go out that you guys will have. And I think that it's filled like chock full of sport-based language to use. And I think that, as Becky has been saying, sport is our universal language. It's how we talk to one another. And so that that PDF is going to be really integral into how we speak to our kids about stuff like this. This is actually not about the words that we're saying, but more about how we're saying it. So tone, we all know that tone is such an important part, and you're conveying different things using one tone or another. We want to be very understanding of what our tone is because of the sensitivity of others at the moment. I think that we've all been to a bunch of webinars at this point. If you are listening to somebody give a webinar and they're talking really fast and they're figuring out and what's going on, blah, 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 that is very unsettling. It is very uncomfortable. And if you're talking to someone in a fast, rushed pace. I can tell my heart rate already went up just by talking very quickly. So we want to slow down the way that we talk. We want to talk in a very calm, understanding way, no matter how, if I'm talking with Becky and Becky's panicking, Becky is upset, her mom made her do something like all the extra dishes or something like that, and she's just going off, the best way to respond to that is going to be like, okay, like, can you tell me that again? Like, can we both talk in that kind of pace? But what you want to do is making sure that you're using that tone first, validating what's going on. Absolutely, I understand that you're angry right now. That validation and that calm voice is going to flip, hopefully, something in someone's brain saying, okay, I'm no longer in a frustrating or dangerous situation. I am now in a situation where someone is trying to comfort me. They're trying to help me. And that is going to have a much better impact on that student than if we get riled up with them, if we ride the roller coaster, right? That's a pretty tough one. Questions and reflecting. When we are coming up against students who are struggling with things, and especially if you don't know what to say, the best thing that you can do is reflect back what you're seeing and what's happening. So we don't necessarily want to say like, wow, you're pretty mad. Putting that on someone can be frustrating or maybe invalidating because that's not what they're feeling. But you can say like, oh, it seems like you're mad. Wow, it seems like that really frustrated you. And then if they are able to respond and say, yeah, absolutely, helping them work through that and validate that. If they say, no, that's not what I'm feeling, accepting that and taking it as well. It's still information that you have. It's still very important to gather from our students. And that reflection back questions, try to make them open-ended, right? How many times do we ask our kids, how was your day? They're like, fine. What'd you do? Nothing. So finding those big open-ended questions that are going to provide just for better answers. Most of our students are so used to and very good at answering them really short if we allow them to. Let's see, body positioning. This is a very, very big one when we are together. And I think anybody who's worked with young children, especially if you are maybe taller or take up a big space, can understand that this is super important when making small children feel comfortable. And that can be crouching down when you're in person, you take a knee while you're talking to all your kiddos, making yourself as small as you can just to make other people feel comfortable, right? That can also happen in a webinar, right? In a Zoom call. I think that it's very interesting to see the different people and the different ways that they put themselves on Zoom calls. I think I'm lucky enough to have a webcam right in my laptop, but I know that there are some people who have their webcam is over here and their computer is over here. So they're kind of staring over here. That's not going to cause as much connection, even if I'm kind of like really close to the screen or really far from the screen, or if I'm looking any which direction. I know that I can be guilty of it, even just reading notes or anything like that, looking on the screen. The best thing that you can do is put those eyes right next to where that camera is, really show the students that you're leaning in, listening, that you care, and the more you're able to show that, even with nonverbals over the Zoom calls, is going to be really important. And the last thing that we have is choice. So voice and choice are the things that we want to build and foster as trauma-informed people and trauma-informed coaches. So there's often a lot of times where we, as our children, are feeling trapped. They can't do anything. They don't have the option. They don't have any control. And most times that's pretty true for young kids. Even more so right now, they are not allowed to go outside. They're not allowed to go, kind of like what Becky was saying, to the park, to this, to that. And whether they understand it or not, it's still limiting the amount that they are allowed to do. So when we can provide choice, that is super, super important. And it's not always an open-ended choice. I think, when you ask a kid, what do you want to do today? There's so many different options that can be overwhelming. It's hard to pick something. Some kids are great at it, not everybody. So if you notice that some of your kids are either struggling or they want more choice, more control, providing a kid with somewhere between 2 and 4 options, I think the sweet spot is 3. with that ability to choose between 3 different options, right? So there are 3 options that you've chosen. There are options that are helpful, probably pretty diverse. If you can have, for an activity, if there's a creative activity, a physical activity, or a social activity, that those 3 options can be pretty great. And then that child gets to decide, like, how do I want to express myself and what feels most comfortable today? That's not always something that we get to do, not in the classroom, very often not in our practices either, but because of the restriction on like support. So there's so much challenge, so much difficulty, so much restriction that we do want to provide more choice. Like, where can we do that, even if we're not doing it within our regular practices?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. One other thing before we go into safety being top of mind is I wanted to point out Amanda's facial cues that she was using in talking to you all and sharing those, is that she was almost validating your experience while she was talking with micro expressions. And that's really helpful in talking to kids, and just giving them a little nod of the head and saying, I hear you, when they're talking. So when they're sharing with you these things and you're thinking about, I need to reflect back, or I need to underline their feelings, and you're listening and you're holding what they're saying, you need to validate what they're sharing with you without saying much. So you need to nod and you need to take in their words. So you do that with a receptive body language. And Amanda was doing that over Zoom. But it's the very small, but very impactful. So on the safety top of mind piece, it can be helpful for coaches, but also youth sports administrators to create a red flag list. So we know that you're not clinicians, but if you create this very short list of things that if you are on a Zoom call or you're on a phone call with a child and one of these things pops up, that you are trained and you know exactly what to do. So it relieves some of the coach's anxiety of what would happen if this occurred. But it also streamlines safety protocol for kids. So for example, a child might say, there's no food in my home. And that would trigger food insecurity protocol. Or there's no one in my home, and that would trigger lack of youth supervision. Or I just don't want to be here, and suicidal ideation would take place in terms of, we need to put a safety plan in place and all of that. So as a supervisor or someone who's overseeing a program, putting that list into place would be very helpful for your staff.
All right, team. I think this is one of my favorite slides by far. This is something that I try to make sure I'm teaching everybody that I know, not even just our interns or staff at Doc Wayne, being a feelings detective, right? It sounds a little silly, a little quirky, but it is so imperative to learn how to do this. One of the biggest things that we want to do is notice that all behavior is communication, especially with children, but even with adults, right? But we're focused on kids today. Kids don't come home and tell you, like, they're slumped over and they go, I've had a bad day, can we talk about it? Right? Your second grader does not come home and say that. What they do is they come home and they're maybe still, bebopping around. They've had a tough day and they're just like, can we play? Can we do this? Moving around, moving their bodies. Kids don't have always the comfortability, the understanding, or the verbiage to talk about their feelings and what that is like. But they are usually able to express it to us with behavior. And that behavior can be positive behavior, like, let's play, let's hang out, let's do this together because I need connection, because I need to show you how I'm feeling, what I'm doing through play. The other things that they do is they can act out. And that is, again, pretty normal, especially right now where, again, the restrictions are so tight. When we are seeing kids kick a wall or, punch something or throw a fit, right? Maybe they're not hitting anybody else, but they're just like freaking out. Maybe there's a little extra screams in the house. That behavior is saying something. And the one thing that we want to do is coaches, we don't need to necessarily figure out exactly what it is saying. We can ask, we can support, but the biggest thing we want to do is get curious. What is happening here? We may not find out the exact answer. That's okay. But just understanding that that behavior is not a problem. It is not a bad trait. It is not showing that this child is a bad child or a negative child. What it is showing is that this kid needs support and they need something, and they're telling you somehow. The best thing, instead of asking, why'd you do that? What happened? Like in a very like angry tone, right? Because sometimes it's frustrating when our kids aren't able to respond and tell us what's going on, and they're kicking a wall in your house. That's your house. That's still frustrating, right? Maybe they're breaking a rule. Maybe they're, really struggling, and maybe they're just loud and it's really frustrating because it's hurting your ears. That makes a ton of sense. I have some kids that I see, and I use my headphones usually for those individual things, and they'll scream on the other side and it hurts my ears, and I don't hesitate to let them know that. But then beyond that, I want to know, why are they screaming? What's going on? A lot of times for us, they're screaming because they're excited and they don't have the space to run around, so they need to get that energy out somehow. And so it's a really important thing for me to know that, because I'm not going to respond with a challenge. I'm going to respond with support. I'm going to respond with, what are we doing? What's going on? And maybe be a little more supportive than I would in a normal situation. So on that note, again, support versus challenge. In your run-of-the-mill soccer practice, I don't know about all y'all's practices, but my practice, when I was an athlete and I would do something that was against the rules or out of line or talking when I wasn't supposed to be talking, it's on the line, you start running, right? And that's not the worst thing in the world. I think there's still some coaches that do that. That's, your choice as a coach. And that's coming from a challenge model, right? We're challenging these students, these athletes to become better, to do better. The thing is, right now, there needs to be an active challenge and support. We were talking about that a little bit earlier, Becky, even just with ourselves. Like, how are we supporting ourselves? Because there's so much challenge. Same thing with our kiddos. We want to try to figure out the exact balance. Again, doesn't have to be exact, doesn't have to be perfect. But if you're noticing that a student is being challenged, how do we support them? If we notice that a student hasn't been challenged in a while, we want to challenge them. But the thing is, right now with COVID, with quarantine, with the immense amounts of adjustment that is happening with these students, that's challenging. It's all very, very challenging. And unless they're actively expressing that they're ready for another challenge, we want to be supporting them. We want to show them that support, again, through all the other things that we've expressed earlier, as well as finding that connection and support and providing a space for them to put anything in that they need to. But again, that question, what happened? Like, what's going on? Are you okay? These are the questions we want to be using and utilizing. And moving into listen to everyone's feelings. Listen to your feelings. I think your feelings in the moment of being frustrated with a child, being angry with someone, being really excited, really happy, being anxious as to whether or not they're okay or safe. These are all emotions that are coming up for you as well. So we want to be listening to other people's behaviors as communication, but the feelings that are coming up for you are still important. We want to validate that. We want to understand that. If we need to take a deep breath, again, the coping strategies don't just happen before the Zoom call. They're happening throughout the Zoom call, throughout our stuff with our kiddos. So listen to your own feelings, respond to them. They're not bad. They're not invalid, but they are important. And noticing what do I need in this moment? What do I need before I go on a Zoom call with this student? And maybe what do I need during it? And so just listening to your feelings, their feelings, everybody's feelings are very important in this moment. So just make sure that we're not invalidating any of that.
In addition to what Amanda shared, it's helpful to keep in mind the signs and symptoms of stress and anxiety for children, as we often forget some of the differences between kids and adults. So a few of them are regression, and this often comes up with little ones, and it's very frustrating for parents and coaches when you see regression and you don't link it to the trauma that's occurred or the situation, and you're just like, why is this this happening? And the developmental milestone already occurred, but they're going backwards, and it could be speech, it could be learning, it could be sleep. But this is pretty common in terms of traumas. We also see physical aches and pains, so you could see headaches with kids, expressions of worry or fear in their play.
Stomach aches are very big.
That's right, Amanda. Changes in appetite, negative behaviors. You could also see tantrums. On the flip side, you could see withdrawal, and with the older kids, you could see apathy or forgetfulness, especially around homework, or things like hand washing, like not wanting to participate in those types of health behaviors. So a couple ways that you can help, and this is just really reiterating all that we've said in the past hour or so, is just to be patient and to provide comfort. And that's both physical comfort and emotional comfort if you're providing these tips to parents, especially. So telling them that really hugs are okay, and hugs are really helpful to little kids. Reassurance, opportunities to express themselves through play and art and other mediums. So if you're thinking about your programming and you can't really get them out on the field, maybe they can talk with you on Zoom and draw. So I saw the Soccer for Success activity where they were drawing the field. So maybe utilizing something like that where you're drawing and talking about what's going on for them in their head. And connection through virtual sessions with friends, exercising, stretching. And for like the middle schoolers or the high schoolers, talking about what they're seeing on social media and what their friends are talking about. So trying to get some access to what the conversations are going on, either, as a coach and from that coaching angle, or providing these suggestions to parents to be helpful. And really just connection is very helpful to kids at any level in terms of these symptoms that we're seeing around anxiety and stress around COVID-19.
I do want to just call attention to the time and respect anyone's time that does have to leave at 2:00. We'll continue to go just because we have about 2 or 3 more slides to go over, and then just some Q&A. So if you can stick around, please feel free to. We also understand if you do have to leave at this time, it will be recorded. So if you want to find or listen to the last couple minutes, definitely do so. But just in the interest of time, thank you all so much for coming. Creating a safe space. So we talk about this so much in therapy and group therapy and just like with students. How do we make and help students feel safe in different spaces? It's different because it's not a physical space right now, but I do think that can, it's still an important thing, right? We're still creating a virtual space where we can be together, and acknowledging that space is going to be very important to feel that connection. A couple of the things that we are able to do at Doc Wayne, so we already have expectations for ourselves and for the group. So every group has 3 specific expectations that they're doing in order to make sure that we are safe. And those 3 are safe bodies. So in person, right, there's no kicking, no hitting, no slamming other people into the ground, whatever it is. But I think safe bodies is also important on Zoom, whether it's, this is the part that goes into the frame, or when you're not supposed to leave, or making sure that there are just restrictions on whether there can be or can't be or your camera on. So we all have our camera on because we're all trying to be comfortable and appreciating each other. There's just making sure that people are wearing the right attire and clothing. I think you'll be pretty shocked to see what some kiddos will do on a Zoom call when they're pretty comfortable. So we do want to make sure that everybody is comfortable and safe. Safe mouths. So usually safe mouths is just being kind, understanding to others. Similar here, we don't want any curse words depending on the age appropriateness of students, and just making sure that they're utilizing kind and understanding language. And then usually just talking one person at a time. This can be controlled, making sure that you're using your Zoom like features. So using the features where you are muting people when they need to be muted, making sure that people aren't sharing their screens, all the safety precautions you can use on Zoom, you know, a wait room, a randomly chosen password, those are all gonna also keep these things safe. Anytime that you set expectations, just making sure that you are modeling those. So we want to make sure that we're modeling how to respond kindly and calmly. That modeling is kind of put in the previous slide with the tone of voice, with the just spatial body awareness, stuff like that. So as long as we're modeling those things, that's really helpful. Beyond your own expectations, right? So you can have your own expectations that you have for the group, but allowing the youths to kind of add into the group, these are things that are important to me, and these are things that I also think are helpful. Some students will come up with like the strictest rules, and you're like, wow, I didn't realize that was what you guys wanted. But if, you know, however, if everybody agrees to certain rules within the group, then that's okay. Because we do want to create a really safe space for everybody, and adding in, again, voice and choice from the students that is going to help them feel more autonomous, feel like they have more say over things. One of the big things that we have come across just working in Boston public schools, and people who have reported stuff like this, of bullying. There have been instances of bullying, whether they're bullying because of the way somebody looks, which is, I feel, very normal, not normal, but happens. They're also bullying people for their backgrounds. So if there are things happening in the background, if there are people who are talking or yelling, or, you know, sister comes and walks back through, whatever that is, just a lot of using the chat features to kind of talk back and forth between people. So you, as a host of a group, can eliminate that chat feature. The Zoom background. So whether you want to do it for fun or not fun or whatever it is, if you have the ability to use a Zoom background or provide a background for others, that could be really helpful, and to like normalize that. Because if we can kind of block out all that background noise, nobody has anything to say about anything. It's fairly equalizing. Again, not necessarily applicable for everybody, but I do think it is a helpful tool to have. And so when you do come across bullying, what is your bullying policy? Currently at Doc Wayne, we have the breakout room feature. We, if anybody is actively bullying in the group, we will take them into a breakout room with a clinician to kind of discuss and talk over and repair that relationship before they come back into the group. I would say that that's a pretty just harsh line, because we are in a therapy group and we do want to provide a therapeutic space for students. If you think that your group can handle a discussion, or just talking about it and what is the consequence of bullying, that's something that a supervisor, a person, like whatever the group kind of comes up with, as long as there's a policy in place before you start. Just because I think as we move along, coming up with things on the fly is just a lot harder. So just putting that into place will be easier to help you support your students.
And the U.S. Center for Safe Sport has also put together some guidelines if you're interested in reviewing those. Many of them are the same as Amanda shared, but they've put together a great document.
Lovely.
So just as a reminder that sport is our common language in good times and bad. And here at Doc Wayne, we've put together a guideline for talking to kids about COVID-19 and sport-based language. And happy to share that in the chat feature. But before I share that, just one example is that timeouts are an art form. And this is more of a basketball example, but the greatest basketball coaches are the best at calling timeouts and really preparing their teams for those last moments in a game, to strategize, to put a play in place, and then to hit that last shot. So in talking to kids, you can use that language to say, yes, things have been paused. Your social activities have been paused. The games that you've been participating in have been. School's on pause. Pretty much everything is on pause. But the people that are put in place to take care of you, to keep the public safe, they're the coaches in this scenario. And they are using their very best strategy to keep us all safe. And they have the long-term game in mind. So there's a lot of parallels between life and sport, as we all know, where this is what we all do, but that's just one example in a way that you can use sport to really talk to kids.
Absolutely. And just don't forget, sport is everything. We play games, we are gamers, we play tag, we, play soccer, lacrosse, football, obviously. But I think this is even a time to embrace the video games, right? We need to start getting creative, and it's exciting to be creative. I know it really is frustrating when you have such a love and a passion for something very specific, but it's our time to get creative now. And to me, that's really exciting. It's really great. I know that some of our clinicians have been, coaching kids through video games. They see them, and whether it's a resiliency factor because they're like, oh, I give up, that sucked, or anger management because someone's getting really frustrated on Fortnite and they can't win and they can't beat them. Like, this is our time. This is our space. We are still allowed to work within the sport realm. So I think it's important, just like, don't forget to be creative and don't be afraid to, because we all have these great ideas, and just because we have them that's geared towards one specific sport doesn't mean that that's where it ends. And just trust yourselves. I think that if I can say that over and over and over again, you are already a helper. You are already someone who is providing skills and support. It's just about tweaking that, and again, getting a little creative in the type of support that we're giving, and maybe additional supports just because of the challenge. So how are you guys going to adjust and change what you've been doing to make sure that we are supporting our youth?
Yeah, so with that, we want to thank you for your time and for prioritizing sport and mental health. On your screen, you can see our next webinar under the Kids and COVID-19 umbrella that we've created. The next webinar is on youth and student athlete suicide prevention, which we know is a heavy topic, but a very needed one. The registration is open. Not all details are posted, but we look forward to seeing all of you on that webinar if it's helpful to you, and you're also welcome to share it. We also thank our partner on this webinar, the U.S. Soccer Foundation, and also want to mention that the sports community is a tight-knit one, and Doc Wayne is here for you to support you, to help you through this. And we know that this will take a team effort to get through COVID-19. So with that, we hope you have a wonderful day and you stay safe and healthy. Take care.
Becky, do we have any time for any of these questions?
Oh, we do. I'm happy to stay on, and we can take that question from the middle of the webinar and also take other questions that come in. Thanks for that.
There are a couple here as well. I really like, so first one was, how do we deal with students who have lost their spring season?
Yeah, that's unfortunately a really common one and a really tricky one. The first thing I would do is lean on your relationship with them as a coach, is to reach out to them and to talk to them about where they're at in life.
And really validate the fact that it sucks.
Yes.
We can really get around it at this point.
Yeah, to validate, but I think people's situations are different depending on if they're in sixth grade or this was their senior season. So trying to listen well and hear them first before you jump into action, and then make a plan with them about how you can best support them, and then figure out what other resources that you can draw into their life to make the best of this situation, but also not to talk about this as all roses, because it's not. And like, to acknowledge that this is unfair in a lot of respects, and it's very difficult. And that young people have lived much less years than we have as coaches. And so this feels very dramatic for them and very, very difficult.
Yeah. The next question, I hope that answered that question. And just, again, leaning on that relationship, I think was a really big part of that. I love this one. We are working with children who are in complete lockdown, meaning they're not even allowed to leave their house for an exercise or a walk. Also, they do not have internet access, so video calls are not an option. We can only communicate with WhatsApp text messages and are doing small challenges and conversations via group chat. They're starting to run out of ideas, and any ideas to keep them engaged would be appreciated. I love this. Again, the creativity that you've already kind of come up with is huge. I know that at Doc Wayne, we did a little Doc Wayne challenge. If anybody saw it on social media, we did a very similar thing with our team, and there was videos and pictures involved of all the things and all the different ways that we are all coping with this. And it was really just fun to see what people are doing, because then I can say, wow, I haven't done that yet. Let me go try it. And just to smile and see other people smiling and having a good time. I think that's one thing that I'm personally lacking right now, is I'm not seeing my friends having and experiencing joy. And whether or not I am, I'm not with them doing it. And that's pretty sad. So how are we adding in different experiences where that's possible? I think that, a challenge is huge, whether it's we're, again, in sport, but what can we utilize with sport that is helpful? Can we do different challenges? Are they physical challenges? Are they artistic challenges? Are they different things creative? Can we do some dancing? I know that TikTok is very popular right now. So if we're using TikTok, I think that's even better if we're just branching out with our creativity. So that's what I would say. Becky, do you have anything to add?
I guess my first response is you are all incredible for trying to manage that situation. It sounds very difficult. And then possibly trying to construct some coping skill boxes for those kids in their homes. And those boxes might have some activities in them, but they may also have some stress balls or some fidget toys or some just general activities, so that when you're able to text them, if they say, I'm struggling right now, you can direct them back to the box and they can pull out a toy or an activity of their choice. That way you're not having to connect with them virtually. I don't know, based on what you've told us, if that's possible, but that would be one of my suggestions.
Great. Awesome. Another one is on Zoom and Google Meets. I'm running into issues with the athletes that are nervous or shy to turn on their cameras. The bond they shared as a team before COVID seems to have disappeared. I've tried different ways to engage them, but don't know when I'm pushing them too hard.
So what I'm hearing from that question is that their team culture is not in the same place that it was. I'm curious your reaction, Coach Amanda, but mine is that potentially start with one-on-one check-ins and then small group check-ins, and you try to build from one-on-one to 2 to 3 groups back to the full group, and then try to see what type of team culture you can rebuild from that. And in the one-on-one check-ins, you try to discover and learn about what is holding athletes back. And in those 2 to 3 group small connections, you can select people that might feel a little bit more comfortable together to rebuild that team culture. Do you have any other response or ideas?
Definitely similar, meeting them where they're at. So again, this idea of challenge, that there's so much challenge happening. I like the instinct of, I feel like I might be pushing them too hard. Some kids will be able, depending on the age, some kids will be able to say like, yeah, you are pushing me too hard. And some kids can't say that. So we want to make sure when we notice it does that feeling, right? We're noticing the feeling of pushing too hard, that feels uncomfortable. lay off a little bit, meet them where they're at there. What is possible with just this? And again, then going into what Becky is saying of building up small ways to access that trust and access that bond. I would say that maybe that bond isn't gone and it's not disappeared, but it's just got a lot of strain on it. And we are having a hard time trusting so many different things right now because of the anxiety and the low level trauma that we're experiencing all across the board. So it's not just the difficulty of confidence for myself, but also the distrust of the person on the other side of the computer. And that may not have anything to do with the connections that you've been fostering between the team. So continue to meet those kids where they're at. And again, when you can challenge, when you feel like, okay, I've supported them, I've done this, I've got this, then go in for a challenge and see how it goes. It's not going to be perfect. Nothing ever is. But kind of switching between support and challenge, seeing where your students are at and really listening to them when they're responding to you, again, with behavior or with words, just continuing to trust yourself, because once you do it more and more often, you're going to be able to respond in just a better and better and more informed and intentional way. So continuing to build up those skills is going to be important, as well as helping them build up their skills. All right, let's see if there's any other questions that I have found. So many people, so cool, everybody. Let's see. Okay, I think that was mostly all of the things we were added. Also canceled summer camps. Becky, is there anything that we want to say about summer camps and just like where to meet them, how to help, how to do things over the summer?
Also incredibly challenging, and none of us have lived through a pandemic before. But I think one thing to realize and acknowledge is that it's helpful to reach out to parents and guardians and provide them support too. So if our athletes are going to be home for the summer, and all of these activities, camps, whether they're day camps or their performance camps, are not going to be in session, then their parent is going to be a key connector and participant in all of our programming. They always have been, but they're going to be even more key. So making sure that your connection with parents and guardians and caretakers are really strong. But the same thing as the conversation with the athlete that lost their spring season is to, again, lean on that relationship, because nothing happens without relationship. And then talking to them, acknowledging, validating, and then making a plan with them about what might be possible with their performance, with their activities, what they can do, focusing on the positive, and then what they could do with their mental game too, so that they can stay focused and strong.
Yeah, I would also respond in a way that, like, we are asking the kids to be flexible right now. And I would ask you guys to be flexible and compassionate with yourselves. If you are used to having a 5-day long, 8-hour a day summer camp, or, you know, for 3 months, and it's a just all day summer camp, and now you're being asked to provide programming for the summer, I wouldn't expect yourself to fill that much time, and figuring out what is reasonable for the students to do and what is reasonable for you to do as well. Making sure that we are meeting everybody where they're at. But again, because of this shared trauma and difficulty that we have right now, making sure that we're also meeting coaches, clinicians, parents, teachers, anybody that you can. If you are a supervisor, making sure that we understand that our coaches can do as much as they can, but they can't do any more than that. So just the compassion for yourself and others as well, that programming is going to look different, and it might be a lot less, and that's okay. All right, Miss Becky, that is all the questions that I can see that had needed to be answered. But yeah.
Well, thank you all again. And I want to thank my co-facilitator, Coach Amanda. But to reiterate what I said before, is that we are here for you. We are here to support you. Our email address is support@docwayne.org. Please email us with any questions, or if you need telehealth services, or you need to be connected to a mental health clinician in your area. No question is a bad question. We will redirect it to the right area if it is not for us, but we truly appreciate you being on this webinar with us and for giving mental health and sport your time. So be well, be safe, and we'll see you another time. Take care.
Bye, everyone.